like with everything, it's an art until you figure out the science behind it, and then it's no longer an art. You
Yeah.
can put that to it, and like there's so many layers to coffee that it will never always 100% be science. So don't worry about that. But at the same time, you're like, oh, I'm trying to simplify it so that it's easier for people to do and easier for people to take control of it and understand how to approach the future. Because I think that's the one thing about the current state is like we tried to overcomplicate it.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Mapper Forward's workshop. It's time to become a coffee consultant. Learn how to diversify your revenue streams and create freedom from your day job while saying goodbye to that alarm clock forever by becoming a consultant within the coffee industry or directly to consumers who have shifted towards home brewing and home roasting. Protect your income from challenging times in the coffee value chain by taking this course today. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for details. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series of a podcast series that I feel very underqualified to do, straight up. Mark, welcome back to the podcast. Mark is our roasting doctorate, almost. As of next week, he'll be Dr. Mark. But Mark, you've been releasing articles and the coffee industry has been going wild over them. And in this series, we're going to talk about past, present, and future in coffee roasting. And coffee roasting to me seems as subjective as what brewing coffee is these days. And so in this episode, we're going to be talking about the current state of coffee roasting. The spot I want to start at is the information that's getting released out there, and the way that people are teaching coffee roasting and what is happening with the way that people are talking online. We're not going to mention any specifics, but there is a lot of information out there that seems to be confusing people today the same way it has been confusing people in the past. What do you think about the way that coffee roasting is taught to these days? And kind of like people keep saying, what's the right way to roast coffee? And yet I don't feel like we've got any more clear on what the right way to roast coffee is today compared to the past. Or am I saying it the wrong way?
No, I think you're saying it exactly the right way. I think I need to stop saying I think. I know the problem is that I think people don't tend to understand their machine in the right way. And I think there's a lot of people and a lot of consultants that have helped people get to a point where they know their machine. But I still don't think people have found what I like to call like the global optimum. So like people are so constrained, not necessarily just in their thinking, but quite often in their thinking, but they're constrained to these very narrow windows of trying to say, we'll try and get this rate of rise. I hate the term rate of rise. It's not a technical term. It doesn't make sense. You can't have sensible negative rate of rise. Let's call it what it is, the derivative, the rate of change. So if you have certain drawings from A to B of what you want the rate of change to be, that is a way that's helping people understand how to use their machine and control it. But it's not necessarily the only way to get from A to B. So I think, starting point is to be taught how to use the machine, but understand what all the levers do. Like, how much does this affect it? How much does that affect it? Because what you'll probably find is it's more how little this affects it, how little that affects it. And I think that's a really powerful thing to actually learn about the stuff. But then, like I said, people are very, constrained and always finding the local optimum when you need to start thinking a bit more broader rather than being like, yeah, let's do a 10-minute roast. Let's do it to this kind of color, and then let's have, this kind of shape of rate of change. And I think that's a very small window where you might work for some coffees, but not everything. And I think the one thing that I'm trying to get people, well, no, let's save that for the next episode.
Okay.
But I think people are quite constrained with their thinking about how they approach different coffees, because there might be a completely different way to get to the most tasty part of that coffee, but they'll never get it because by the time they've figured it out, they're probably out of that coffee.
Right.
And I think no, go on.
I'll go. Do you think that people are like, people have been told what the rules are? Do you think, like, try and read what I'm saying here without me using names. People are being told what the parameters are, what the rules are, what they should be aiming for, what, what their coffee should look like, what coffees they should buy, coffees they shouldn't buy. All of these rules that people are, and signals that people are being given by one consultant or, Instagram influencer or another. Do you think that those rules around roasting and coffee buying are the problem here and stopping people from actually exploring and getting to know their equipment?
Yes. So I think the one thing I keep trying to figure out in my mind is, you see people selling coffee for a certain price, and it seems to be that everyone seems to sell for a given price, and everyone's like, on a normal bell curve around that price. But because I've been my own little specialty roastery, like not my own roaster, but my own roastery. The thing is, like, I can see that people are trying to make great things out of cheaper coffees. So like a lot of the stuff that I see and I want to sell is stuff that's maybe considered as, just the higher side, like better than average coffees, but selling them for a similar price. But it's because you're buying better stuff and you don't have to work so hard to get tasty out of them. And I think that's what people keep chasing, is they're trying to get the flavors of these, super fruity, they want to taste the chamomile in a coffee that probably has no potential for chamomile. And I think that's the problem, is people are told that this is the way to do it. These are the coffees to buy. And maybe they're constrained by having to run a business, which I get. But I think being told that this is, the narrow gap that you should work in means that everyone tends to form a monoculture on what coffee looks like, what coffee tastes like, and what coffee should be. But not everyone is preaching that. It's just the loudest in the industry are preaching that. So there are some people saying, these are the tools. You don't teach the person to fish. No, you don't give the person a fish. You teach them how to. And in principles here, I think a lot of people are told this is the way, but there's many ways to get there. And I still think, there's plenty of people that don't get the limelight, that are practicing and preaching these things, but they're not the ones that are getting all the attention and all the publicity.
Is there any one that you would like to highlight that's doing that? That deserves, like, who you think? I mean, you're doing that. Who else? Who are some other voices? I mean, there's a reason that you're the first roaster that we've had that I felt safe enough to have this conversation with you. And I want to qualify something. The reason I've been so scared to have this conversation with a coffee roaster before on the podcast is because a lot of people want people to feel intimidated around coffee roasting. It's a really 100%. Intimidating thing, right?
Yeah. No, I can see that a lot as well. And I think there's a lot of people that have said to me that, there's a concern that you're trying to simplify it. And I'm like, well, like with everything, it's an art until you figure out the science behind it. And then it's no longer an art. Yeah. You can put that to it. And like, there's so many layers to coffee that it will never always 100% be science. So don't worry about that. But at the same time, you're like, I'm trying to simplify it so that it's easier for people to do and easier for people to take control of it and understand how to approach the future. Because I think that's the one thing about the current state is, like, we tried to overcomplicate it. We're doing all the tiny little gas changes, and if you see some people's, attempts at trying to get the perfect rate of change, it's just like you touch in the roaster every like 5 seconds. No one does that when they're baking a cake in an oven, right? No one does that when they stick a pizza in. They're not watching it going, perfect Maillard reactions. Yeah, that's exactly the crust I want. And then turning the gas down. No one's doing that. And I think that's the mentality. Yeah.
Well, DJs do it and they pretend to do it when they're...
Something we want to model ourselves on.
Anyway, the thing is, there's a lot of this that seems to be, and I've always wanted to ask somebody this question: how will we know, right, what the right way to roast coffee is, given taste is so subjective? Am I an idiot for thinking that that's an important question?
No, it completely is. And it depends on context. I think if you, and this is something that I've got a bit more exposure recently with my current role, is like when you do sensory, like there's so much statistics behind it. And I think it's really funny because if you then actually like do small changes on your coffee roasting and get it to like slightly different time, or like, 10 seconds difference, or, 1.5 degrees Celsius out of your specification. If you cut that 3 times in like 3 coffees, so like 2 are the same, 1's different. You do that 3 times, you're probably not going to taste the difference. Cupping. So if you then take it to an espresso, then add milk, you really think those 5 seconds are going to make a difference?
No.
Someone probably tastes the difference, but they might not. They might just guess it randomly. They might not even, know why or describe why it's different. And I think coffee is a lot more forgiving than we give it credit to. I think that's the big thing that's interesting for me. Is like, you can. It's like with coffee brewing. If you've got good coffee ground in the right way, no matter what you do, it's going to be a good coffee. You might be chasing that 20%. It might take you 8 years to get that 20%, or 4,000-pound grinder. But I think the point is to focus, like we say, on the consumer. If you can't taste the difference, or can barely taste the difference, consumer's not going to taste the difference once you've done all that to it. There's so many other variables downstream that may not even matter.
Especially when they're having cappuccinos with 2 sugars.
Exactly. Maybe even the type of sugar is going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, and the kind of milk and the kind of water that they're using to extract all of those kinds of things. Do you think... We used to have this conversation about, when I was barista, who has more impact on the coffee? The roaster or the barista?
I would say the barista.
Tell me why.
Because I think there's more, well, it depends if the barista is trained by the roaster and works for the roaster. In that respect.
Let's assume they're both professionals.
Well, I think it all comes down to like quality control, doesn't it? Because the roaster, it's all part of the supply chain as well. Because it's like, if you think about it, who has the biggest impact? The producer or the roaster? Probably the producer. Right. In that respect. Because like a washed and a natural from the same farm, same producer, has a huge impact on flavor. Mm-hmm. And then many roasters have the classic chat GPT response of, we're just here to highlight what the producers do. And that is, in essence, kind of also what the baristas are selling as well. They're like, we're just trying to bring out the best that the roaster has done. Mm-hmm. So it is connected, but I think the barista has a huge impact on delivering flavor. They're the end goal. It's quite, I think it's a lot easier to mess up a brew than it is a roast.
And, I would take a different perspective from that side of things. It's a little more, I guess, complicated, because if a roaster fucks up a roast, no matter what the barista does, it's going to be really hard to make that coffee shine.
Garbage in, garbage out, sure.
Right? Yeah. But if the roaster does a really good job at the roast, it's going to be, they give the barista a better chance at making that coffee shine. But having said that, if the barista doesn't know how to understand channeling, doesn't understand how to steam milk, doesn't understand how to calibrate the water, doesn't understand how to calibrate the grind, all of that stuff, no matter how good the roast is, it's probably going to taste crap. So it probably goes back to your point of the relationship between the roaster and the barista? Have they calibrated together? Have they been trained by, like, have they worked together in any way? It's a symbiotic relationship of sorts.
Yeah. And I think you'd be surprised. No, I need to like I said, I need to stop saying I think. I know you'd be surprised at how many roasters QC only at cupping and don't do espresso and don't do filter
Yeah.
extractions for their coffee.
I've always wondered that. Why are we only cupping the coffee when the consumer is never going to consume it that way?
It works for people because you can do it fast and you can do a lot of them. But it's just, it's the same as like cupping green coffee. Oh, not cupping green coffees, but cupping green coffee samples. You're doing it for a purpose, and that purpose is not necessarily to test if it's going to be good as filter or espresso. So, like, I feel like it's the way I roast coffee is like one way that sits between people's preference of espresso and filter. But even like that, it's like there's more than just filter and espresso out there in the world. It's just those are the ones that are most prolific. Like most coffee shops, you'll say that has an espresso machine as the primary method, and the filter is always secondary. But cupping roasted coffees after production, it's for you to figure out how well you've done with the roasting compared what do you expect. But many people just stop there and don't think about how it's going to translate to the espresso, how it's going to translate to the filter. Because I think one of the big things is you might be able to roast light and make it taste great on a cupping table, but if the coffee shop doesn't have the right grinder, doesn't have the right ability to change temperature, they're not gonna get the full flavor potential out of it.
No.
And this is one of the things that I did a study on as well on Medium. And it's like at that point, what happens? Does the roaster change their style to accommodate the coffee shop, or does the coffee shop overhaul their equipment to suit the style of the coffees they want to buy? Because at the end of the day, the roaster's customer and consumer is the coffee shop, and the coffee shop's consumer and customer is the person drinking the coffee. So at the end of the day, someone's got to give.
Which leads me to a question. If we're talking about the present of coffee roasting, presently, what do you find as a well-roasted coffee?
For me, it's just something that's tasty. Tasty is...
Oh, that's a cop-out, bro.
Yes, because there's not one rule fits everything.
Okay.
I mean, the one roast profile that fits everything, but actually, I think there kind of is, because that's what I do at the moment. I use one profile, then basically, and everything tastes delicious. So I'm sitting here confused because I roast everything exactly the same, all the beans I get in, and they all taste good. And my confusion is then, well, why does everyone have, a roast profile for everything? But then I realize, oh, it's because I've got a very narrow subset of specialty coffees that have a very tight tolerance on their specification. And like I said, where the monoculture idea comes in, that everyone's doing the same thing because everyone has the same similar inputs. But I mean, for me, a well roasted coffee, perfectly developed, and development isn't something that just happens after first crack. Development happens from the time it goes in the roaster and even before. But it's just something that tastes good if you make it any way you want. Espresso, filter, a mocha pot, cafetiere. A coffee should be able to taste good in all of those with one profile, in my opinion.
That is quite controversial. I mean, I love the idea that that you have simplified it that way. And the part that kind of the younger barista in me that was trying to understand that when I was a puppy barista, it was like people needed it to be complicated to justify their existence as a roaster.
Sure.
And the artisan kind of part of it.
Yeah, but maybe that speaks to me thinking, okay, I'm going to keep the roast the same, and therefore the output, is what I expect. And maybe that just speaks to the way I buy green coffee. Maybe I'm buying a certain coffee that just always roasts well with this profile. So maybe that's where it is, and maybe other people get what they can and get what they can afford, and then because they're trying to make something out of nothing, they'll try and spend a lot of time tweaking it, thinking that's going to get them somewhere. So maybe it just speaks to the quality of coffees that I'm buying and my processes downstream.
But objectively, is it? No.
Works.
Yeah, right. Objectively, that's okay. I hear you. And I hope that other people want to make their lives that simplistic. Anyway, join us in the next episode, folks. We're going to talk about where coffee roasting is headed. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of conversations around technology and lots of other delicious stuff. So join us for that. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.